Call meeting to order. This is the Wednesday, August 19th, 2026. We need the whole meeting for the Glencoe Village Board. Village Manager Crowley, we can do a roll call, please.
President Rowan.
Here.
Trustee Ballwax.
Here.
Trustee Mealopoulos.
Here.
Trustee Underdog. Here. Trustee Rosenblatt.
Here.
Trustee Rubin. Here. Trustee Scott.
Here.
So, Trustee Alwex said here, but of course he's not exactly here. He's been joined remotely in accordance with our remote meeting policy because he's traveling for work. Unless there are objections, does anyone object to Joe participating remotely? Nobody objected, Joe, you're in. We are not live streaming this meeting tonight, but the video recording will be available on the village YouTube channel. Pursuant to the village's public comment rules, because the village board's regular meeting is scheduled tonight. Public comment on non-agenda items will occur only during the board meeting, which will start at 7 tonight. And have a comment on an agenda item that's included on the committee of the whole agenda. We'll ask those comments to be provided when we get to that item on the agenda. At the appropriate time, all comments related to the agenda items are limited to 3 minutes, and I'll notify the speaker when their time is up. The first item on the committee of the whole agenda is initial review and discussion of the Public Works Facility Space Needs Assessment. I'll ask Assistant Village Manager Adam Paul to present. And we have some consultants that he can introduce. Yeah.
Thank you, President Rowland and members of the board. Tonight, myself and architects from Williams Architects will provide a comprehensive overview of the space needs analysis completed to date. As you recall, back in December, the board approved a contract with Williams for a village facility space needs analysis covering both the village hall as well as the public works facility. Given the public works facility's location and importance to the village, we've asked Williams to provide sort of a first phase analysis of that site and to provide some additional assistance to the board to prioritize that area first to discuss it. So very high level, just a brief overview, and Williams is going to go into it much deeper than I am, but the public works facility is a 30,000 square foot facility located next door at 320 Hazel. It was built in 1955, expanded in 97, and it's a 1.2 acre site in the downtown. Operationally, the department is there is some operational strain at the facility. There are divisions that are not located at the facility that do operational work, including the water distribution division, as well as administrative and engineering staff are located here in Village Hall. There is a constraint on space in relation to project coordination and resident and contractor meetings. And so we have asked Williams to conduct that space needs analysis, and they have some information for us this evening. As part of that analysis, they also engaged in a facilities conditions assessment. They're going to talk about that at length. As an outgrowth of that, we have included $900,000 in our 10-year CIP for needed masonry, roofing, and other repairs that they have identified as part of that space needs, as part of that conditions assessment. In addition to that, they also identified $4.5 million in further improvements if the village were to continue operationally at that site. We'll talk a little bit about that as well too. That dollar request is not included in a 10-year CIP, but is brought forward this evening for discussion points. Obviously, this parcel is of high interest to the village. It was identified in the 2024 comprehensive plan as an extreme redevelopment opportunity. I will note that redevelopment of the site could generate some one-time proceeds or some reoccurring tax revenue. Obviously, converting the site from municipal use to a taxable use would generate revenue for both the village as well as adjacent taxing districts that are part of the village. In addition to that, the new facility at a different location could allow the village to consolidate workspaces and ease some space constraints at the village hall. As you recall, we've talked at length regarding the public safety staffing study. As part of the next phase of this project, which Williams will talk about, is additional investigation of space needs at the village hall. That'll come forward for you at a later date, but obviously we're looking at space needs in general for both village hall as well as public works. So with that, I'll introduce Andy from Williams Architect and Kim. They're here to provide an overview of their work to date, and I'll turn it over to them to provide some additional context for them.
Great. Welcome. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, trustees. Thanks for having us here this evening to update you on where we are in our process and most importantly, answer any questions and get some feedback as to our direction so far. So we're here tonight to give you an update on where we are in this process. As Assistant Manager Paul mentioned, we've been asked to sort of front load the public works portion of our village-wide space needs assessment. So that is what we've done, and that's the focus of tonight's presentation, where we are so far, and to give you an opportunity to ask us questions and give us feedback on how it's going. So we want to talk about our overall process. We have conducted a facility condition assessment of both the facility next door and the Village Hall facility that we are sitting in tonight. So we want to touch on some high points of our findings there. I will transition after that to the more exciting part, which Kim will present, is our findings with respect to a potential replacement public works facility on the frontage road site. So we'll talk about what goes into that, what that could potentially be, some very preliminary cost models. We can talk about next steps and finally answer any questions that you might have. Want this to be a discussion, want this to be useful to you, and make sure that we answer your questions and understand how we got where we are and where we're going next. So just a little bit of background. I'm the municipal sector leader for Williams Architects. We're a 55-person firm headquartered in Itasca with offices also in Chicago, Michigan, Indianapolis, and Columbus, Ohio. I lead our municipal sector, which is working for 30 different communities all over the Midwest at the moment. We are particular specialists in village halls, public safety, and public works facilities. So we are very pleased to be here tonight and to be able to apply what we know to the situation and needs here in the village of Glencoe. I'm assisted not only by our wonderful and very capable project manager, Kim Nigro, but a whole team of licensed architects from Williams who support us in this study. So what are we trying to do? I think, put quite simply, our goal is to not just come to you as trustees and tell you our opinion of what you should do, but we want to make sure that our ideas, our recommendations are firmly grounded in objective data, objective condition assessment data, objective space needs data. Everything we are doing and are presenting to you tonight is grounded in fact and grounded in evidence. So when there's a square footage recommendation, we are able to back that up quite simply with a definitive need beyond that. When you see a potential layout, we can tell you based on our experience that operationally these arrangements and spatial organizations are very workable for municipalities in similar situations who are doing the same sorts of things. So it's been a very collaborative effort. Staff have been very helpful to us so far in getting us the information we need and giving us the feedback we need to conduct this study and bring to you the findings that you'll have tonight. So we have a process that we like to share. Again, this is very intentional. We build a team of experts that seek as much input from all of you as stakeholders as we possibly can. We conduct that existing conditions assessment so we understand what you're working with right now. We get into an understanding and a process of your space needs, what you have now, what we believe you'll need for your current operations and for future and evolving uses. Then we get from that basis, we start looking at conceptual design, what could possibly happen on a new site, and just a very quick look at what that could look like. We also team with a construction manager, in this case, FQC of Redwood Glen Corporation Construction Management, who's done a number of these types of facilities, to put together some preliminary cost estimates. So the costs that we'll be discussing later in this presentation are not just high-level architect estimates. They are cost models from a construction management firm that is building many of these facilities right now, some with us, some with other architects, but they are informed numbers. So we're here tonight to present that all to you and give us your feedback. So let's talk about what is happening next door, the existing facility. It was built in 1955. We had an expansion in 1997. As Adam mentioned, its site is just over an acre, and there really isn't a good way to expand it. We can't expand outwards because of the configuration of the site and the street surrounding it. As you can probably imagine, a public works facility that is mostly garage and service space is very difficult to expand upwards. We are really maxed out there in terms of space. You're doing a wonderful job of maintaining the facility. I think that's very evident in everything you have here in Glencoe. Staff are doing a great job. You're obviously taking pride in what you have and taking care of it as best you can. Having said that, there are just things inherent in any structure that gets to this age, combined with evolving uses and changing needs to operate public works and serve your residents well, that are hard for a 70-year-old facility to overcome, no matter how well it is maintained. So some things, just some highlights of what we found, and this will be backed up by a very thorough assessment report that we have in draft format. We are seeing a lot of masonry deterioration. We design masonry buildings today with the understanding that they are going to move and contract and expand based on the temperature differential and moisture that we have come to expect here, especially pretty recently in Northern Illinois. Back in the 1950s, this wasn't really something designed for. So if you walk into that facility, you walk around the facility, you're going to see a number of cracks in masonry that are just really a function of the building not having been designed for that. None of those cracks, from what we are able to determine, are at this point affecting the structural integrity of the facility to the point where we see a serious concern. But again, because of the way it was designed, we can tuck point, we can do crack repair, but we can never really get at that original issue of that building simply not having been designed for the kind of movement that we see. Along with that, because it's an exposed steel structure inside, it's been used for a number of things. It's been used for salt storage over the years. We just have a lot of corrosion. Some of it is surface corrosion that we can certainly work with, repair and repaint. We are a bit concerned in some areas, though, that some of that corrosion has gone beyond just surface rust and is getting into the overall structure. And we've seen not only some corrosion damage, but some damage that has just happened in the course of normal public works use. Trucks coming in and out, accidents happen, and we've seen some structural damage. Again, nothing serious enough to say this is a serious incident or occurrence that warrants closure of the building or immediate fixes, but there are things of concern. Other things that we really see, most of these facilities that involve vehicular traffic and especially truck and heavy equipment traffic, the ability to exhaust the building and have good indoor air quality is a serious concern. Again, this facility was just built in a time before those were considerations, and those are very difficult things to retrofit into a facility. We really need to provide exhaust and air circulation based on the space that was designed. And yes, it's possible to retrofit, but we don't have that right now. So it is an indoor air quality concern for the occupants of that building and the folks who are working in there every day. And then just one thing that is very difficult to overcome, even with unlimited dollars and unlimited ability to repair, is just the building wasn't designed for the size of equipment that we're using today. It wasn't designed for the width of trucks, the height of trucks, and that structure just, again, we can invest money to repair these things, but it's very difficult to raise the clear height of a garage without restructuring the entire thing. So we just are very constrained by the configuration, the structure of the facility as it relates to modern day equipment and modern day movement and size of vehicles. So those are the highlights of our condition assessment. There are other small things we found. There are minor areas of non-compliance with current accessibility codes. It's just things that we would expect from buildings that were designed and remodeled at the time they were. So again, building is maintained well. It's simply, because of its age, has limitations that are very hard to rectify against current public works and vehicular needs. So again, we just go into a little bit more detail there based on our findings, based on some of the limitations. I think it clearly became evident to us that we should certainly explore our options, not only to rectify the issues present in this facility, but also to see what alternatives might exist to replace these needs and these very important functions on another site. So that analysis combined with our space needs analysis, which really got into details with public works leaders, talking about their operational needs, their needs for the fleet, really told us that not only are there condition assessment or facility condition issues rather with the facility, it's also too small for the village's needs. And the primary driver of it's everywhere really. It's not only space to work, space for staff to accomplish what they need to do to serve the public works needs of the facility, but also just a lack of space to keep vehicles and equipment inside. I'm sure you're all aware that you're keeping a great deal of your fleet outside just because of those space constraints. And there is a real cost to that. Although there is a cost to build a space to put vehicles and equipment outside, we know from our experience that every piece of equipment that you put outside that you could put indoors is going to need to be replaced anywhere from 25 to 35% sooner than something that is able to be put in a garage every night. So though it certainly is an investment to put vehicles and equipment indoors, it is also an investment in an increased expense to keep them outdoors. So that's something that we are, it sounds a bit like a sales pitch, but you will absolutely save money over a long term as a village on your operations, on your fleet maintenance and fleet replacement budget by being able to get as much of your fleet and your equipment indoors as you possibly can. I think I touched on the high points there, but as we got into this, looking at everything that needs to happen in terms of increasing space for village needs, both current and future, looking at what needs to be done to repair the facility. You're really getting into, as I said, a question of is the juice worth the squeeze, quite honestly? And we really should look at our alternatives for what else we can do to meet the needs of the village in terms of public service delivery moving forward. So that leads to our next piece of it, which talks about what could potentially be done. But before that, because this is a committee meeting, Before we get too far into this, I wanted to stop and see if there are any questions about that background in the condition assessment at a high level that we can answer at this.
Clear,
Okay.
straightforward. Probably preaching to the choir. I mean, so just because of where the garage is located, the village has been interested since 1956 in whether we should have some commercial multifamily use there. And I guess my only question is, how able would you be to quantify the cost of, trying to preserve something where it is?
We actually answer that later in this
Okay.
presentation.
And in light of the presentation, which is, okay, we could sort of preserve it, but it actually wouldn't be as good. And I don't know whether there's some kind of a assumed number you could attach to that. Because I think, so we're separately looking at a development ordinance, and we're certainly looking at what to do that you're going to get to at the water tower site. And we get that none of this is free. And as we decide, okay, maybe we have to build a new thing. Well, okay, is that it would be helpful to us if we can explain to our residents, building a new thing is really expensive, but not building a new thing is also really expensive. And taken together, it might make sense for us to do big projects.
Yeah.
So to the extent you can help us quantify this, and we understand, we just are finishing with a big construction project in our golf club. Numbers that we started with don't exactly match the numbers we ended up with, for which some people want us to explain that. We get that.
Yeah.
But to the extent you can give us numbers, that's how.
Sure. Well, we absolutely, that's part of, part of what we do in our position is anticipate the questions and concerns of the community and all of you as elected officials. I am an elected official myself. I serve on my Board of Education where I live. So I understand the information you need and that you need to provide the community. So we're going to get to some of that cost analysis, but I think what we can very confidently say in general is that replacing or attempting to replace the facility that you currently have on its current site is absolutely going to be more expensive than the alternative that we're going to discuss next. And it will not meet the full space needs that you have just because it's impossible to do on that site. And that's before we get into any of the development considerations that you've all mentioned. So I want to lead with that, and I think you'll see some more detail as we get into this analysis and some of the possibilities.
Yeah. Other board members have questions, or should they move on? Keep going.
Okay, I will turn it over to Kim to talk about what we would call the more fun part.
So as you mentioned, this is the site that we've been discussing, the 1900 frontage road property, where you're already taking advantage of some of that space for some public works needs in terms of material storage and some additional vehicle storage. So this is what we're going to explore the possibility of.
There you go.
Snap happy. Sorry. So as Andy mentioned, kind of where we started was even while we were looking at the facilities next door, talking with all of the staff about what the real needs are of the department, both administratively and with the fleet, and looking at how much area that would take if we had an ideal scenario to support the staff and to store the vehicles properly, stage all of the operations needed in the yard outside of the building, all of those things. And, based on our knowledge of doing public works facilities and even recent projects, foreign history projects, we have that database of area that is typically needed. So we start with a range of square footages. We have more in-depth staff conversations about your particular department and how you work and narrow that into a target square footage. And so again, by comparison, Adam mentioned the current facility is about 33,000 square feet. And that's including mezzanine level shop storage and things, more like 25,000 as a footprint. And so, you know, total needs, ideally, if we had all the space in the world and no limits, we're more at the 51,000 square foot range for total program of a new public works facility. So the first thing was to look at how could or would that need fit on the current site. Doesn't quite, but we did investigate that. We'll talk about it when we get to the cost estimate portions later. But it did justify the look at what would a programmed new facility look like on the 1900 frontage road property. So again, what we've started with at this point, this is very high level feasibility study level, almost more adjacency diagram level of plans. We don't want to jump the gun. We're just looking at, is this possible? And so these are those program areas, you know, specifically from our document that are space by space needs, how they would want to relate to each other, because it's important. You can't, there's only certain things you can put on the second floor of a public works facility. You know, obviously the vehicle garage needs to be at ground level, the shops for maintenance and walk bay, those things that are need to be driven into all have to stay, that kind of darker pink zone need to stay on the ground level. And then we've got these lockers, shops, those are for each department to store their gear. And then we do want to provide training room space. Right now, the lunchroom in the facility will not hold everybody at once. There is not a place where everyone can gather in the department and have training. And then, you know, basic administration and entry facilities on the far right end of this kind of administrative bar. This does come down. There we go. So entry would be somewhere in this zone toward the front of toward frontage road. Circulation for staff to go upstairs, but there's not a lot of public interaction need at this facility. If we've been told to recycling drop-offs, a few things like that. We do want to welcome people if they come and need something, but not a lot of lobby space designated. So again, this is showing a vehicle garage that would have one-way traffic and drive back out the other end. We've, you know, certainly will continue to study this if the project moves forward, but we've tried to accommodate as much of the fleet as we can. And this is really just maxing out as much footprint as feasibly fits on the site. I'll get to a site diagram in a few minutes to kind of explain how we limited the shape and size of the building to this at the ground floor. On the upper level, things that can move upstairs are offices. And so supervisor's offices here along the perimeter. Inboard would be more things like mechanical, electrical rooms, restrooms, in kind of an open cubicle office area for additional flexibility. And then a kitchenette and lunchroom for administrative staff here. And then this roof access is essentially, we could use some of that for mechanical equipment. It could also allow some outdoor space off of that lunchroom. And then access to the storage mezzanine in the garage, which would go over some of those shorter vehicle parking spaces and just give us really maximize some storage space in that garage space.
I do want to touch a bit. It says roof access. We're in essence holding that space. We're not quite done yet with our spacings analysis here at the Village Hall and adjacencies between departments that work closely together. So that space is kind of held in lieu of that final determination of what's going to occur with our Village Hall space needs. So I don't want that to be 1,800 square feet for a terrace or roof access. There is a purpose behind that. It's marked on the plan as such, but we're still doing our analysis here.
So just so you know what kind of determined that line was sort of the limit of tall space that's required for vehicle clearance. So it's hard to stack second floor space over this zone. And so in order to maximize that's kind of, you know, the line of available space that we could easily put a second story over it. Thanks, Adam. So in terms of the site, I mentioned I would kind of talk about how this footprint came to be, and we did start here. You know, the main purpose being coming in off Frontage Road was really important to the staff that we try to separate the yard activity of the fleet and staff working here versus traffic, staff parking, you know, people just coming into park and get to work. So we've got this corridor along the north that would be gated, so it is just for staff that they could drive and park and make use of. Really important factor here is the common right of way. So right now, properties to the north and south of you are making use of this right of way in various ways, and we've already started conversations. The Public Works Department has started the process of getting that approval from ComEd to use that space because it's a really important part of the feasibility of this site working. So we could use some of that space for staff parking. There is a grade change as you move south, and so we're showing a retaining wall here in order to try to limit the amount of earthwork we would have involved. We could slope down and still get this additional parking here. One of the uses that came up for that additional parking was that public safety they have stated vehicles that they need to store, and that would be really important additional service that the site could provide to them. And so we've provided staff parking, a little bit of visitor parking here in the front. And then again, the other main functions as you come through the site, large vehicles are driving through, back out, circulating back toward the front. We've got material storage here, salt dome, fuel dispenser with 2 dispensers, so trucks could pull up in tandem to those and still go out a secure gate back towards the road. We did take a look at whether it was possible to pull a second driveway through on the north side of the water tower. The property line really goes straight this way, and so it would get into some negotiations with the neighboring property to try to use that. You know, we're not sure about the actual feasibility either way of being granted 2 curb cuts, and so we wanted to show the more basically feasible driveway option here to start with. There is a ComEd tower here that we have to, you know, navigate around, and so we left parking out. We'll study how close we could get and what else we could make use of in this zone as we get into more detail. That's on the site.
The only thing I would add, you'll notice that the way that really anybody using the facility would circulate around the site is really all a series of left turns. We know that is always safer from a visibility standpoint and is easier to navigate. So we always try to lay out these sites with safety in mind, and keeping all the turns to a left direction so people are seeing where they're going and see what's in front of them.
So we did kind of want to give a little better visualization of how this would lay out, what that massing might look like for a facility of this size. And again, just very high level feasibility wise, we wanted to at least give you something to sink your teeth into a little bit or to discuss with the public more. And so, you know, what we've shown here is basically that same site arrangement that was on the plan view, showing how tall the vehicle garage would be, and how the 2-story administrative zone would stack next to that. And that's that open area that's available to either further program or use for mechanical space. Again, the administrative space and lunchrooms are kind of the zone that would have more glass, some views out, health and amenities of the staff working there. And so we just very quickly threw together an image of what that could possibly look like for the happy staff members coming and going from their new facility. Now to the costs. So again, as Andy mentioned, we worked with FQC on early cost models. We looked at a low and a high range estimate because this is very preliminary. They had not even seen the the 3D imagery that I just showed you. They were working basically from square foot takeoffs of the program in an early site diagram to come up with ballpark numbers, high and a low range of what this facility might cost based on that. And again, as Andy said, based on recent projects in this area that they are building. And so they took those same square foot per cost per square foot and applied them to this facility. And so this kind of just breaks down those total cost range, which are between 23 million, 26, almost 27 million. But obviously, there's a lot of money still in design and escalation contingencies. Like any project, when we're at this early stage, that contingency is very high as we know more and design more, and they can price an actual design and architectural drawings. That contingency comes down. And so that goes toward, evening out the budget, making sure we're in range, gives us some flexibility to avoid cost overruns as we design.
Yeah, the other thing I would add, one of the things we're commonly asked when we present costs like this, we are very well aware that the first numbers that an elected body sees are the numbers that you commit to memory and may as well be carved on a stone tablet. But we're often asked about why the range of costs and why such a range. And the simplest answer that I can give is that there's a lot that is still unknown. Although we have what we believe is a very workable concept plan, we do not know a lot about the environmental conditions of the site. We do not know about soil conditions and what may be needed for foundations there. We have not had any substantial conversations with respect to aesthetics and architectural expectations of the village with respect to a facility like this. And as you can imagine, in a fairly large building of this size, there are a lot of different ways you can build it and a lot of different materials that you can use, which come with different costs. So we want to make sure that we're being realistic in the ranges here, depending on all those conversations that haven't taken place yet and what might come of that. What I can say is that we are very confident in the range based on all of the facilities that we have recently completed in the area and have under construction. We currently have a facility that's actually very close in size to what we're showing you conceptuals here under construction in Antioch right now. We have another facility under construction out in Oswego that's quite a bit larger that him and I are working on. Just finished something in North Aurora and have others in planning and design stages throughout the area. So I think we have a good handle between us and our construction manager on what it takes to build these. And like any project, as you get further into the design and planning, you're going to get more clarity on all of those things, and you'll see that number start to sell.
That's the one. Staff is very cognizant of the cost. We really took a hard look at some of the feedback that we were receiving from staff about sizes of various areas that they'd like and they do. We were cognizant of the request. I just wanted to be known that we didn't say we need a 50,000 square foot building. We were very, very focused and honed on what we wanted and what we needed from this building. And we bore that out in numerous conversations with Andy and Katie throughout this process.
So I have three questions. Just if they're going to be answered. Question one. So focused on the site that we have. We don't have many other sites. In theory, we could make a deal with somebody elsewhere, but further you go, but who knows what that costs, the further you go away. The village was pleasantly surprised back in 1990s when we were able to use some of village land to put these two car dealerships there, and that was lucrative for the village. That was good. And so the question is this site suitable for some kind of lucrative private development? I can imagine the answer might be no, But I'd love to hear from architects who are in the bids, or is the best use for this site a public works site?
I'll start with that, Kim. Please feel free to share your thoughts. I mean, I will be honest and say that we have not performed that kind of comprehensive analysis of what else could be done with that. Having said that, as I just think about it intuitively and some of the real realities of and constraints on that site. It is on a frontage road. It is not very walkable. It is bounded by, I believe, 2 car dealerships, and it has a large high voltage transmission easement to one side. So if I remove my public works and public facility architecture hat and just think about, if I were a developer, how attractive would that be to something? I think there are some real limitations there to it with respect to its suitability for a wide variety of things. But however, all of those constraints that we mentioned don't tick public works and municipal use off. So I think some of those things that are constraints or potential, I would say, value limiters to other private developments in some ways make it more attractive for this use.
I would just add, just from a historical standpoint, the village has owned this site for well over 100 years. It's been the location of our water tower since 1928, which is a critical component of our entire water distribution system. It was the site of the village's incinerator for about 60 years, which is one of the questions that we continue to need more detail on from the standpoint of what the site may require in terms of remediation. So when we talk about, could this be a site that could be open to development, it's much different than talking about the site across the street from Village Hall because of the way our facilities are integrated into it. It's worth noting, we have had discussions with neighboring communities about the possibility of working together to construct a site outside of Glencoe's boundaries. As you said, President Rowan, we have nearly no developable land available for a use like this. We have talked to the Park District about shared opportunities, and what led to the Park District moving forward with the project that they're just completing now. We didn't have a site large enough in Glencoe to support both public works and park operations together on one site. Those discussions with neighboring municipalities are not necessarily ideal when we talk about response. And as we were discussing with the village of Northbrook, the possibility of a shared facility somewhere on Dundee Road, we run up against the fact that there is a at-grade rail crossing on Dundee Road that would limit our ability to get back and forth. And there are fewer available developable sites in Northbrook that were convenient for their operations that would take into account the Lake Cook Road underpass. And so it went maybe better for us and worse for them. So those conversations didn't really result in a whole lot of positive options. So these are conversations. It's an interesting discussion because the public works site has been a bit of a Groundhog Day discussion in the community going back 30 plus years. There was a comprehensive development proposal at one point in the 1990s that never really got off the ground. But we have talked about various options. And I think what we find ourselves unfortunately coming back to is that the frontage road site's really probably our best alternative for a different location if we have to stay within our corporate boundaries. And I would say our struggle is our corporate boundaries are tight. And so without any opportunity at all for a forest preserve site to ever come online because the forest preserve is not allowed by state statute to actually sell property. We know that's not an option. Certainly, if one of the private country clubs were to close, that might be an option, but the likelihood of that is nearly zero. So we really look at what we have and say, thank goodness we have the frontage road site, because it really opens up the best alternative for us at this point.
Okay, second question, and maybe you've already answered this. So those are big numbers for the village of Glencoe. You look at our annual budget for everything, and you look at those numbers. Those are big numbers. Is it your opinion today that it would cost us more than those big numbers if we tried to fix the current space?
That's our next slide.
Okay, then let me skip over that and ask one other question. So, as we're all homeowners in Glencoe, there's something that I've always understood to be the nutrient agreement. So that if you want to get something fixed or done, it costs, this in Antioch that you mentioned, but it costs this here. Are your numbers, is the nutrient premium invisible for a project like this, or do your numbers account for it?
Here's what I would say. To honestly answer that question, we have to talk to the construction managers, put this together so we can follow up with that. What I would say is here, the assumptions that went into this are very similar to the other facilities that we've completed throughout the area. You would have the same types of construction, you would have the same site work. You're actually working with the exact same contractor pool that's building other facilities. So I don't believe that they have put that sort of premium on their numbers, because the project itself is no different in terms of its construction and its content. What I would say is those ranges that we are showing account for what I might call increased community expectations with respect to the exterior appearance or materials of the building. If the expectation of the community is that this cannot be precast concrete and must be full masonry, it's going to go towards the higher number of that range. So I suppose that's one way of saying is I feel like our ranges that we are presenting tonight sort of bring any of that into it to the extent that we understand that.
Just one point to add also, and I think this is just helpful for everyone to be reminded. Public sector projects are limited in ways that private sector projects are frequently not. And one of those ways is prevailing wage requirements generally push up the cost of public sector projects 10, 20, 30% above what a like private sector project might be. And so we discovered, this is true of the clubhouse project. We've had the dialogue in the community about why. And that is it's a fair critique of a project, why I've seen projects like this go for X millions of dollars and yours is X millions more. And yeah, I agree. I wish that were not true, but that is an aspect of what we are required by state statute to abide by in terms of the public bidding process. And so that it's just a helpful reminder for us as we also look at these numbers is that there is a public sector premium that also gets tied into those construction costs.
The only other thing I would mention that might be driving our projected costs above and beyond what you might see in, for example, Antioch, is that this site will require a substantial degree of stormwater management to accomplish the program and the functional objectives. There simply is not space for what we'd call a surface stormwater management facility, i.e. retention or that sort of thing. We've got to handle that underground in storage, which is naturally more expensive than if we're able to construct something like a pond. So, but I would call that a limitation of the site, not necessarily because of where we are in the Chicago area.
So just at a very high level, to answer your earlier question, we did work with FQC based on the facility conditions analysis that we put out. They looked at pricing, what those costs that we talked about earlier to repair and work with the facility, maintain it as it is. And then they looked at what if we tried to build as much of this program as we could on the same site. And because of the extensive demolition and staging and temporary relocation costs that would be involved in moving public works facilities elsewhere temporarily. Like I said, demolition, that it actually would likely drive the cost higher than the facility. So one of the biggest gains of building elsewhere is the ability to stay put and keep operating where you are until that new facility is ready to move into. So again, a similarly large range, but all things point to a higher per square foot cost to do that. And again, if doing that, you're not gaining the benefit of whatever else might have generated revenue on that site instead. So that's again our high level assessment in terms of comparative costs. And I think that wraps up what we have.
Yeah, so we certainly want to continue to answer any of your questions tonight, but our next step, certainly want to take your feedback. If you have questions that we cannot answer this evening, we will be back in front of you to not only give you an update on this process, but present our findings that are still in process with respect to the facility that we're sitting in tonight. So we're looking forward to that, but certainly want to answer any other questions we can while we're here.
I ask questions.
Question, is the site large enough? Reason why I asked that, at one time we had our own garbage collection and we now contract that out. I don't know how long that's going to last in the future. I would think that we would want to continue to contract that out, but if we had to bring in additional storage facilities, trucks, something like that, would it be possible to add on to the building, or would we need more sites? Or
I think honestly we'd have to look at that. We would need to get an understanding of what would be required spatially to make that function possible here. And I honestly don't think that right now.
I will say that right now, as it is, when we looked at the absolute, all of the fleet and all of the vehicles that you would like to store inside, even with the garage as shown, we're not getting absolutely everything in there. So the garage as drawn would not have extra spaces available for an expanded use like that. And anything additional would kind of feed into that functional yard space a little. So
yeah, what I would say is what makes that site particularly viable for the totality of uses required for public works is the ability to use that easement area for surface parking and for vehicle storage. If that were out of the we started studying this with that potential off the table, and what we could actually build and what we could put inside was much smaller as a result. With that in mind, as Kim mentioned, I would have a concern about trying to stress the site further with another function.
Okay. Other trustees. Trustee
For your presentation. It appears we have amazing experts here at the table, so we appreciate all the work you've done. I wanted to piggyback on that. I guess my big question is, we're familiar with using other people's space. When you bring up the common right-of-way question, is that something that has been worked out and guaranteed that we will be able to use this space for this use, or is that something we're still not sure about?
we've, Public Works staff is engaged in conversations with ComEd. ComEd has said preliminarily that they are open to us using the space, but there's a necessary process by which we have to go through to acquire that space and use that space. So we're engaging in that process currently. It will require some consultant support to do so. very preliminarily staff to staff are engaged in that process.
It's just administrative stuff we have to do. There's no.
It's not uncommonly
It's not-
used.
yeah.
Thankfully, we are certainly not the first ones to ask for it. And as you kind of move north and south from the
Yeah.
site, both of our car dealerships that are south, and then several of the properties that are north of the site in Northbrook, and in Glencoe, likewise, are using that comment right away. Because they know they're never really going to use it for any, no, they're using it officially.
Okay.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, comment doesn't do anything unofficial, so. It's a process and it's essentially an easement agreement,
It's not a big deal. Okay.
generally not, yeah.
So I was curious about some of the unknowns on your site. Stormwater management was brought up. So has that been evaluated, like for instance, with the MWRD to see what might be required and?
Yes, we are entirely confident that it will require underground storage, and that has been priced into the ranges of the estimates.
Floodplains or? I don't think they are, but.
There are no floodplain or floodplain issues from what we saw.
We did just very preliminarily engage our civil engineer to review the turning radiuses to make sure all of that traffic flow works and look at the driveway locations and stormwater. We are under a certain threshold that would kick that stormwater management into a whole other level. So we're at the very basic stormwater requirements.
So it sounds like.
Yeah, if this project were to move forward, we are very experienced in the MWRD permitting process, and that actually drives the entire pre-construction schedule. If we know we want to break ground at this certain point, we've got to back up 8 months, and that's when the submittal has to happen to be ready. But obviously, we're not there yet. So,
The only other recommendation I have is, as we learn with the golf course clubhouse, as much recon that we can do on site, we talk soil conditions. Incinerator, I don't.
yeah, there
We have any other tanks that we want to investigate.
Yeah,
Probably to do.
our recommendations, and coming out of this, we will have another final presentation. You will see a report. It is absolutely necessary to do more due diligence on the site, understand the soil conditions, understand the environmental remediation that may be required there. And I think because of those unknowns, it would be very irresponsible of us to come in here with this is the price, because we know how that can go.
I will say that we did get an initial report of testing the lead locations. The reason we had various options we looked at for where the building on the site goes, and we did go to that north side for building because there is likely more soil that we don't want to touch on the south portion of the site. And again, that also affected the grading and how we flow traffic. We want to, if possible, that yard area, we will just cap, and that will save costs on site work if we're not messing with the most contaminated portions. So.
And I suppose on future needs, how do you anticipate future need? Because 30 years from now, 50 years, things can change a lot. They could maybe all electric vehicles, maybe multi-use vehicles that we don't have now. So how do you put that into your planning?
The electric vehicles is a good question, and every community has a different answer and what they anticipate in terms of their fleet. If we get to that point in the process where we're, looking at total electrical needs for the new facility, we have to talk about how much of the fleet might go electrical if we ever had to upsize that service or transformers, or where would that go? Last thing we want is to design a nice new facility and then put a giant piece of electrical equipment out front to power those new needs.
So we sort of think about that. It's going to be 30 years from now. So if these buildings last for 50 years, 100 years. Yeah, what's going to happen 30 years from now? And our vehicles going to be different. I'm going to need less space because the cab one vehicle we just add on to trucks and pick up garbage, cut down trees, whatever. I think it's
So one of the reasons we initiated this study is we did this very same study 25 years ago. And in 2001, the village's public works operation was significantly different than it is today. And to your point, vehicles were smaller generally. And the number of vehicles that we used for specialty reasons was fewer. And so we knew if we went back to that 2001 space needs analysis, it would be irrelevant. So it's important, I think, and been very much a part of our dialogue internally with the Public Works team, that we think about what it is from an operations standpoint we may make modifications to. I will say, 2001, we were still collecting garbage. We knew we needed space for no less than 4 garbage packers to store inside in that facility. We no longer need that space, but let me tell you what, it gets reallocated for something else, because what we've done is shifted resources elsewhere into the Public Works Department since we outsourced garbage collection 8 years ago. And so that's part of what we know we need to continue to be evaluating is what are those long range changes? What are those industry-wide changes that are going to hit the public works world? What are vehicles going to generally be like 10 years from now is easier to predict than 20 years from now. But I think we have a pretty good sense of the work that we do today may be generally the same as the work we do 10 years from now, but the work we do 20 years from now may be different, right? And so we have to have enough flexibility, but that doesn't necessarily mean additional space. It may mean reallocated space.
Yeah, and I think that's very well put. And I think what I want to emphasize is that I don't think any of us in this room or anyone else out there doing what we do knows exactly what is going to happen in 30 years with respect to vehicles and with respect to best practices. What we do know is that it's going to be different, and therefore our approach right now requires flexibility. So to be able to have that large vehicle storage garage that, yes, it is developed with sizing of the majority of your fleet in mind, it is also flexible for current use, for future uses. It's a wide open space. That storage mezzanine of 7,000 plus square feet is infinitely flexible space for storage and or operations for things that we may not even have on our radar yet. So I think to the extent that we can know, it becomes about flexibility. And I feel that we're putting a high degree of that into this concept at this point.
I think one other point, and Adam mentioned it early on, is what we're continuing to evaluate with this building is what our long-range needs are going to be. And we also recognize that the likelihood of ever replacing Village Hall is nearly zero. Public safety is stretched with space to the point at which they're on top of each other in certain parts of the building. We know that office space is significantly limited. Part of what we are also going to look at as we review the office space in this building would be the possibility of relocating additional people out of this building to a new building in order to make this building remain as functional as possible. So that's another piece of the discussion that could push the price point up on that building, but it keeps this building operationally relevant for much longer if that's the case. And so that's part of what we want to make sure is that whatever investment we make it with those kinds of considerations in mind as well, because it's not likely anytime in the near future will we have the space for a new building or the opportunity to construct another one if we move forward in something like this.
So, is it fair, absent the concept of joint venturing with neighboring community to build a much bigger space, sharing and all that stuff, which depending upon the needs of the equipment, whatever might be nice in terms of sharing some of the more expensive pieces. But in any event, assuming that's not the case, but an alternative site, let's say an alternative site magically appeared in a couple of years on, say, Dundee Road on the wrong side of the tracks where the old golf course was. At the end of the day, you're still building a 50,000-ish square foot building. That site's going to have its own consideration.
That's correct.
It's going to have its own expenses. I mean, it's gonna be this number plus or minus.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
at the end of the day, there's the biggest chunk of that, while you're gonna have environmental aspects here, but you'll have something else there. There's always gonna be something in a project like.
Yeah, that's true. And even, what Kim and I have under construction out in Oswego right now, wide open, 3.5 acre site, no grading required, perfect spot for a public works facility, actually adjacent to their current facility. So now we're creating a campus and keeping the existing building. What could go wrong, right? Well, what went wrong was the fact that 30 years ago, when it was developed as an association for industrial use, that site was basically used to dump all the clay that they found from everything else that was built there. So guess who's taking care of that now? So the point is, you're right, there's always something.
Yeah.
Yes.
One last question. Program, yeah. It's like $5 million number. I'm not sure what that is for.
I could touch agree that
I also wanted to add, I'm a proponent of investing in, our capital infrastructure and assets sooner than later to also limit, these maintenance items and that can also be very dollar heavy. So I just wanted to hear a little bit.
Sure.
about the timeline of that.
Sure. So we categorize them as near-term and long-term repairs. So for example, the board decides that we don't want to build a new public works facility anywhere and we want to continue operations status quo. Obviously, some investment, as Andy had indicated, we needed in the site. So as part of the conditions assessment, we've identified approximately about $1 million in repairs that are needed in the near term. These are structural and masonry repairs for the bricks and mortar of the building that needs to be done. As I mentioned, they also, Andy and his team also looked at what we would need to bring the facility forward, more modernize the facility, so to speak. And some of those would be, remodels of office space, remodels of bathroom areas, remodels of other areas that are located in the facility. And Andy and his teams put a figure of approximately 4.5 million.
If we stay at the current.
That would be if we stayed at the site.
Okay, I
and
thought
didn't
that
do
was like-
anything at all.
Even if we move, we still would spend this in 5 years.
No.
I wouldn't recommend doing.
No,
this.
but
Okay.
that said, we have identified 900,000 in the next 3 years.
Okay, so
that we
3 years.
programmed. And we obviously will space that out to do the.
And I would just jump in to say that what's been programmed in right now too could be affected by kind of the direction that we go. Especially when it comes to roof repairs. I mean, I think there are some roof repairs that need to be addressed in the short term, but the scale of those, that may change that dollar figure, whether we know, okay, we're gonna spend another 10 years here versus another 5 years. So I think a lot of this is trying to understand the lifetime that we're looking at this location, and then making the correct investments in the short term as well as the long term.
That was kind of my other question as well. Thank you.
I just want quick question that I think is for staff. What are the contingency in the golf course ourselves?
We had a 5% contingency by the time that we went out for construction.
Okay.
I think during design, we started, it's as you start through the design process, you start with like a 30% contingency, and then as we progress through, that contingency kept dropping down to 20 to 10, because you are more and more certain of what your designs are, what your unknowns are. So that contingency, while it's starting out large here, it's because there's so many unknowns.
But it's large, but not relative to what yours, apples to apples, you were saying in the golf project, we were at 30% contingency at this stage. Y'all are at it.
Well, there's a couple different contingencies. There's design
And I'm thinking adding
contingency.
things that should be
Yeah,
added.
and then there's construction contingency. So even when we know exactly what this building will look like and the drawings have gone out to bid, we still want to hold a contingency for unknowns. So that's the part I think you're asking. That's from maybe where in the golf course scenario, it's that construction.
Every project is
Well,
different.
but the golf course scenario also involved another unit of government.
Fair.
That was a oversight
unit of government. So that was driving some of those larger contingencies early on in the design cycle. Because we really didn't know whether we were going to be required, for instance, to seek LEED certification. Those types of unknowns as we were negotiating the land use agreement with the Forest Reserve District. So that, yeah, and it was a different project for a lot of reasons, but that I think was the big driver of where those numbers were different.
Just trying to wrap my head around it. Thank you.
Some question.
That it is, do you need anything more from us? If not, thank you. So thanks for the presentation. Thank you, Adam. Thanks for trustees following up.
And just as a quick note of next steps on staff's part, as Adam said, we're going to continue the process on the village hall. And as that evolves, my hope is that we're bringing that back to you in November, maybe December. That feels right. Yeah, November or December. We'll have a better sense of some modifications if they impact this project.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. The next item on the agenda.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda, and I'm sure this is going to be even more brief than was anticipated. As we were pending updates to the village municipal code. And assistant village manager Adam Hall, our village attorney, Stu Weiss, are going to present on this.
I'll use as few words as possible. So the.
Can I use the word you don't?
Yes, together we'll make whole words.
Get rid of, and I get, you don't have to explain at length, but get rid of undertaker. You know, I get that.
Obviously, the municipal code governs our day-to-day operations. Over time, the structure, staffing, and technology has changed. So in coordination with the village attorney, we've conducted a phased review of our village code to align it with the best practices of municipal government. Obviously, the code is extensive, so rather than bringing it forward at one time, we've elected to take it in bite-sized chunks. So tonight before you is chapters 2 and 22. Chapter 2 covers administration, 22 captures licensing and permits. There are two of the village's code sections larger chapters and cover a wide range of functions within the village. So we wanted to address that first. I'm not going to go over kind of the nuts and bolts of the initial review, but in the memo, we've got some information about what kind of is currently underway. But we did want to bring up some items for you to discuss that are important, some changes that we have drafted and are before you this evening for discussion. Obviously, we prefer some feedback on the standing committee structure. At the moment, we have language in the code that has a defined list of committees and standing committees that are annually appointed by the village board and the village president, confirmed by the village board. So obviously, we would look to shifting that code to village board discretion. As proposed, we're looking at whether or not there's some interest in combining some land use commissions, going from 4 land use commissions to 2. Obviously, we've had some discussions internally regarding whether or not the appointed member from our sistering agencies should continue their service on the plan commission, not because they don't wish to, but because obviously the impact to their families in relation to service on those boards, both serving as a park district commissioner as well as serving on the planning commission, can be impactful to the families. So whether or not we wanted to explore adjustments to that. Moving on to personnel.
Before we move on, I think we should try to take these in blocks because I think they're going to need some consideration.
Okay.
I would also just make note of one point, and I meant to suggest Adam make this comment before, and I forgot to. Sorry, Adam. I think when we look at chapters 2 and 22, 22 is a bit more timely from the standpoint of the fact that we'd like the board to consider the changes to 22 so that as we are preparing for the next fiscal year and the business licensing process, that we have the new code in place so that we can facilitate that as effectively and efficiently as we can. Chapter 2 has some heft to what we're talking about, and we recognize that it may require more dialogue than we have in the next 15 minutes to get thoughtful consideration of some of these things that we're putting forward. So it may be valuable from a standpoint of effective use of time tonight to spend time on 22. I think you should go through the rest of 2, but perhaps if it pleases all of you, that I think is 22 is I think where we need the guidance sooner than 2.
Absolutely. So I'll touch on 22. 22 is not located in your packet because we wanted to conceptually discuss it with you because it is a change that shifts how the village conducts business licensing. It shifts it in a different way. So at the moment, we anecdotally, we provide business licensing to the community. Businesses reach out, they fill out their licensing, they pay their application fees, and we process their licensing. In conversations with the village attorney, we have had discussions about whether or not we want to shift to some simple registries for businesses that we would normally need to license. For example, retail businesses in town, strictly retail, purchasing of goods located in town. Do we need to license them versus service as a simple registry by which we're collecting information?
Can I get just a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, of course, I was going to pivot to you. So that was kind of the concept behind it. I'm going to turn it over to Stu because we had some good dialogue.
Yeah, so I think when you look at a lot of municipalities, business licensing chapters, some of them are very ancient. And President Rowan made the joke about undertakers, but I've dealt with things that literally had like offal collectors, like people who would go around with carts and pick up dead horse meat. And that was literally in a code provision that had survived until a few years ago in Des Plaines. And the fact was that until probably the 60s, 70s, and 80s, almost all business regulation was done at the local level. Now you obviously have state level licensing of even things like hairdressers. There are notably a number of professions, trades like plumbers that are licensed at the state level, and we are not allowed to license them locally. We adopt the plumbing code, but they get a state license. They can work anywhere. It used to be much more that a license was literally a permission to do a specific trade in a local area. And so since we've moved to federal and statewide regulation of a lot of these professions, a lot of these things are, they're just obsolete. And they may be in our code, but we do not actually license them. So the framework that we've always recommended is if you have a specific profession or type of business in your village that you want to regulate and impose specific regulations on, not just building to standard building code, not just fire, but there are specific regulations that you want that are bespoke to that type of business in Glencoe, then you can license it. If not, it would probably be more appropriate to just say you have a place of business. We'd like to know what's going on. We need to register the place of business, and we just need to know where you are. Because really licensing where you're applying local regulations takes up staff time. It can be considered burdensome to not necessarily business friendly. And then oftentimes it's duplicate. So that's really the framework that we were looking at. And when you attack some of these old chapters, you can cut out whole sections, wholesale, where either those professions no longer exist, or we just find that we don't, we have a whole section on taxi cabs and chauffeurs. And there are still, Chicago still regulates taxi cabs at a municipal level. One of my other clients, Waukegan, still did. But Glencoe does not have its own taxi medallions. And it does not choose to regulate Uber or Lyft. And it certainly does not go after, require specific village licenses for chauffeurs. At some point it may have, but that is no longer the case. So that is the context of really modernizing this and making it much more of if there's something that type of profession we specifically care about, we can keep a license. Otherwise, we're just talking about really registering places of business.
Which ones
Just out of curiosity, an example or two of the ones that you're keeping.
Restaurants, grocery stores, stuff that obviously needs a higher level of oversight in relation to food, food inspections and stuff like that.
Theater, writers theater.
No, the theater is just a regular standard business.
It would be just a retail business. So it would be, obviously all these places of business have to comply with fire, and that would deal with occupancy, and very specific occupancy levels for congregational areas like that. But in general, we're not really getting into, well, I mean, the biggest business that we will continue to license is the one that is liquor, which is the one that's really the license that most municipalities are most involved in. And so that is an example where you can have markedly different regulations from municipality to municipality. Highland Park can have very different regulations than Glencoe just by choice. And so I think that's a really good example where local licensing still matters.
So what about businesses that we don't like? I mean, I remember this came up when I was on the zoning board. Tanning, some ultraviolet tanning facility that I think most of us probably think something that's a cancer.
That you meant hide tanning.
No. A cancer cure.
That's when you go too much.
If we make this change, which seems generally sensible, would we lose the ability, unless we thought about it in advance, to say, yeah, we don't really want to tanning store?
So I cannot recall if we have that particular regulation currently in there, but you do have for massage establishments, and most communities keep those because of the unfortunate proximity to massage establishments and often prostitution. And so, there are regulations regarding that. Med spas are something that were not, very prevalent and now are everywhere. And, there are a lot of communities that are trying to impose local licenses on those. So that's, and other ones, tobacco, obviously.
So
tobacco.
I'm just saying, if we went, and you can see how sensible this change is in general.
Yes.
But are we if we do it, do we lose the ability until somebody's already come in, they're grandfathered in with something that in retrospect, we say, ooh, we don't really want that?
So what we've been doing is working up a table of, what is currently licensed. And then do we foresee that remaining as a license? Do we see it being as just a general registration? Or do we see it not even like needing a registration anymore? And I think our next step would be to present to the board where we're basically what that looks like. And as I said, the majority of these are actually going to go just straight to a business registration, but there will be some, we were talking about auctioneers. And, if someone wanted to do a charity auction, are we giving up our ability to regulate that? My response to that is that's probably going to be a special event. So we're going to be able to regulate that through that avenue. And we're going to keep obviously special event registration. But it's a fair question. Once you take something off the books, are you losing your complete purview over it?
Anybody have a question? I mean, we should look at the new and improved that you're proposing. And, just keep in mind.
I think that one other aspect to this, and this has been on a work plan for probably the last 8 or 9 years to finally address Chapter 22. It is also an effort to try to streamline the business process for the business community, right? Part of what we don't want to do is create or have in place a bunch of somewhat irrelevant regulatory structures that make it more difficult or more cumbersome for a business to open in, right? And I would say there are some aspects of what you're talking about, President Rowan, that are handled through the zoning code, right? In terms of the acceptable uses that we will accommodate. And we're very explicit in our zoning code about not saying what you can't do, but actually saying what you can. And so those aspects of it, I think, are also coming into play as Adam and Stu kind of continue to work through an updated chapter 22. But, you know, this is like we did when we redid the entirety of the liquor code back in 2015. The intention is to make it less cumbersome on the business community while still retaining as much authority and control that the village needs to make sure that that these businesses are doing what they say they do.
Makes sense.
And I mean, literally, I think we're, is it forests that we're getting rid of and putting the impact fees in? Or is, I know it's undertakings.
Undertakings.
Yeah. So, well, we recently, we got rid of the florist chapter and are now recycling that chapter for another purpose. There was a time where you had to get a license to be a florist in Glencoe rather than just like a general, is your business clean enough to code?
I think we're moving in the right direction. This sounds a few thumbs up for me. I am curious, so from if we do change from licensing to registration, would those be like annual registration, would reflect contact information and whatnot? And would those registrations have a fee associated with it as well? Or are those?
Yes, at the moment, we are not contemplating a change in fee and so as part of this, just a little peek behind the curtain, we're looking at how we do our licensing as well too, and exploring how we do that process in and of itself to make it more streamlined. Obviously, the first year I was here to handle business licensing, I just wanted to intake what we did and kind of incorporate that and see how it goes. Now we're looking at what we can do into the future, and I think this is a great first step towards that.
Do we have contractor licensing, for instance, for people
I-
who come and do business here?
So we are
Could that be part of this?
exploring that. We understand that that was discussed during our discussion regarding home rule.
Okay.
I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but it is something we are exploring. So I do
Yeah,
want to
because if
mention.
we streamline this, we can also implement something new and streamline that, make it online and then charge.
And of course,
annual fees.
potential revenue related. to-
Exactly.
And we do license landscaping,
Yes, yeah,
landscapers
that's-
and snow plowing and things like that. So I think there's a thoughtful marriage between that. And so, yeah, that's absolutely on the list.
Plumbers necessarily, or maybe
Right.
electricians as well, or maybe,
They have better lobbyists.
yeah. they do. But and again, at the end of the day, it's not only revenue, but it's also contact information, so when we want to reach out to these different companies, even locally, when I was on the STF, how do we get in touch with the business owners to talk about compostable? We didn't know who to contact or what, so at a minimum, the registration for local businesses, I think, would be very beneficial.
It also could be another tool for enforcement.
Exactly,
Okay,
thank you.
I'm not going to touch on chapter 32. I'll just mention it is before the village board this evening upstairs. Taylor will present on it. So if you have any questions, obviously, that would be the time.
so. A little close. Is there, I think we're done. Thank
Yeah,
you.
we'll push chapter 2
Yes,
and on
right.
time of next month.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I want to move, second, all in favor?
Hi.
We are adjourned and we're